Intervening at a time of crisis, Thailand's army justifies imposing martial law, insisting it's not a coup. But what's next, and how will military control help resolve the political standoff? This is Inside Story. Hello and welcome to the program. I'm Dareen Abughaida. The chief of Thailand's military has summoned the country's political rivals for face-to-face talks a day after declaring martial law. The decision by the military to step in followed months of protests and political conflict in a power struggle that dates back to 2006. Ordering the feuding factions to get together is viewed as a breakthrough of sorts, although the way forward isn't clear yet, and the meeting hasn't done much to quiet speculation that martial law may only be a prelude to a military coup. We'll go to our guests in a moment for reaction, but first, Scott Heidler has been gauging the mood in Bangkok.
For 8 years, Wacharan Payachat has been a supporter of the Pheu Thai party. He's part of the group known as the Red Shirts. A former civil servant, he joined them because of the public health plans created by Thaksin Shinawatra, a former prime minister and founder of the party. He does not see martial law as an army takeover of the government he supports.
I don't think it's a coup yet, because they haven't announced that this is a coup. It's clearly military intervention. But if something happens, we will march under the order of the red shirt leader. We're united to fight for democracy. Whatever he says, we'll do it.
Despite martial law and the army's orders that the protesters must stay in position, the pro-government red shirts are maintaining their promise that they'll cross the Chao Phraya River if the elected government is removed from office. And this is where they would come. The stage for the anti-government protesters, or the so-called yellow shirts, some 25 kilometers away. A Thai folk singer, Moonkoon Utuk, has been performing on yellow shirt stages for the last 6 months.
So when the military stepped in, I think it was the right thing. The people wish to rely on them. So it's not like a coup, but this is taking back the power. The power of the state is at the end of the gun barrel. The people want the reform. Once the reform is in place, there will be an election.
But political discussions moderated by the army have just started. And there's a lot of ground to cover before there's agreement on a way forward that will be accepted by everyone. Scott Heidler for Inside Story, Bangkok.
All right, so can the army act as a mediator to Thailand's polarized political rivals, or will the military try to impose its own solution? Let's get the thoughts of our guests. They're all joining us from Bangkok for Inside Story. We have Kasit Piromya from the opposition Democrat Party, and he's also a former Thai ambassador. Nattakorn Devakula, a TV host and political analyst, also a former independent candidate for Bangkok governor. And also joining us is Dominic Faulder, who's a Bangkok-based journalist and author. Good to have you all with us. Kasit, on these political discussions that took place on Tuesday, there was no breakthrough. They're now moved on to Thursday. Will that lead to some sort of agreement, or is this situation going to take much longer to resolve?
Well, I think the military intervenes in order to facilitate an exit from the political impasse, and also at the same time to provide peace, security, and safety for the populace in general. And at the same time, they have not taken over the running of the government, because all other institutions of the government are still working, especially the upper house, the Senate, which is now still deliberating to come out with a decision on a name for a new prime minister.
So you sound optimistic, Kasit, that the military will be able to facilitate the situation.
Yes, facilitate reconciliation process and to keep the peace on the street, so that the opposing forces would not come at one another and violence could have occurred.
Nattakorn, are you as optimistic as Kasit is? I mean, is this a coup of some sorts, as some people are describing it, the imposition of martial law?
Well, the action undertaken so far by the Army Chief certainly tramples on the very freedoms that are supposed to be enshrined within the Constitution. I mean, he has already banned a total of 14 television stations. On top of that, there is a new order that bans 200 community radio stations as well. So it doesn't really matter what he's aiming for. What he has undertaken is a violation of the very basic liberties that is supposed to be enshrined within the Constitution. That's the point.
So you must be very concerned, because from what I understand is your TV show, in fact, The Daily Dose, which airs on Voice TV, is currently banned because of the martial law.
Yeah, the problem is not about my program or any one of the networks. It's all of these orders that places restrictions on media freedoms. I mean, the media at this point cannot even invite a guest to comment politically on any program.
So why do you think these curbs have been placed on media?
You're not going to have a return to democracy.
Okay, so why do you think that the Army has done this and specifically targeted the media right now?
You have to go ask the Army Chief.
Let me ask you your opinion. What do you think?
It doesn't matter what I think. It matters what he thinks. Why is he trying to place these restrictions? You have to go ask him.
Dominic, let me ask you, why do you think these restrictions have been placed, and how would you categorize what's going on in Thailand at this moment with the imposition of martial law?
Well, I'd answer the second question, or try to answer it first. I mean, basically the military has climbed on the dragon's back and got directly involved in the political process. So now we need to look for two things. What are they going to do? Are they going to try and take us to free and fair elections, which have failed already once this year? We have two possible dates coming up. Or are they going to get involved in some other process, which Kun Kasit has just actually referred to, which is the Senate getting involved in repositioning the government? So we have a caretaker government that disbanded Parliament with a view to going to election. This has not gone down. The elections have stopped. We're moving forward now in an uncertain direction. So what we need to really find out is what the General's battle plan is, and why he's so concerned that people shouldn't be discussing legitimately what is going on in Thailand.
So on the issue of the restriction of civil liberties, which I believe you were just hinting at, and also Nattakorn was telling us about earlier on, I mean, what do you make of these sweeping powers?
Well, we're waiting to see. I mean, people are very surprised that this happened. It came out of the blue overnight on Tuesday. I don't think anybody predicted it. And of course, one of the rules of watching Thai politics is never predict anything, least of all coups. Now, you can make an argument out that we haven't yet had a coup. It's coup light. We're sort of halfway along the road to it. But if the military are getting themselves involved in the dialogue, if they're trying to mediate, and take it beyond simply preserving security in the central region, which was in fact perfectly okay when they took over. If they're taking it beyond that, then they're getting into something that's very difficult to get out of. They're taking responsibility. This takes us back to 2006. We had a coup which led to an interim government that was appointed. And that was a very unhappy experience. And a lot of people thought that the military would come away from that thinking that they really didn't want to get back involved in politics. Now, the problem that the military has...
But would you agree with the argument, Dominic, I'll just ask you this, would you agree with the argument that the military, in fact, had to step in and get involved? The protests were going on for months on end with no end in sight.
Well, that's all correct, and there is an impasse. But if you're justifying martial law because there is a threat to law and order, that you believe that there's going to be imminent violence on the streets, then I think a lot of people would say, well, that really wasn't the situation in Bangkok this week. It was actually fairly peaceful. Now, if the military had information that there was going to be some invasion of Bangkok, that the red shirt hordes were going to come sweeping across the Chao Pier and down from the northeast, and that they had to act quickly, they could point out that the police have been very, very weak in the past at preventing people performing takeovers. We've seen government buildings taken over. We've seen major intersections and areas of central Bangkok completely locked off to the general public, and basically sections of the city brought to a standstill, so affecting the lives of citizens in the city. But there was not evidence of this earlier in the week, I would submit, and I think a lot of people would agree with me.
Well, the crisis can be traced back to 2006, as you all know. In September of that year, business tycoon turned politician Thaksin Shinawatra was forced from office in a coup while he was out of the country. His Thai party was then banned, and the People Power Party was created and supported Thaksin, winning elections in December 2007. Then 2008 marked the start of mass protests for and against the government that lasted more than 2 years. Elections in July 2011 resulted in Thaksin's sister Yingluck Shinawatra winning a landslide victory to become prime minister. But still, the protests continued, and earlier this month she was ordered out of office for abuse of power. Well, broadly speaking, the crisis in Thailand is seen as a battle of wills between the two main camps. Let's just remind you of those camps. Supporters of the deposed Prime Minister Thaksin Shinawatra are generally known as red shirts and typically rural and working class. And then there's the anti-government movement, which includes yellow shirts, who are predominantly urban and middle class. Let me go back to my guests right now. And Kasit, so far reports are saying that the red shirts, those that support the government, of course, say that they do accept martial law, but they won't accept and they won't tolerate a coup. So could this turn into something much larger? Could we see violence on the streets?
I don't think there will be violence on the street because the military is everywhere. And second, the banning of all the radios, television, and so on, those are the ones that have been a sort of political mouthpieces on the opposing side. So the military doesn't want the various media to continue to incite people. So the banning would be temporary. And at the same time, the military has invited all the parties concerned to a negotiating table. And I think this is what everyone would have to take one step back in order to find a compromise formula. And the formula would, I think, comprise, a new interim government with full power, reform process, a referendum on the reform, and eventually a new national elections under the reform rules. And I think this could take maybe half a year if everyone could agree. Take a step back and let the reform process continue.
Nattakorn, if you look at the political climate right now, I mean, does it set the backdrop for meaningful talks to take place?
What the military should be doing is enforcing the law, and the law at this point is to have the next election as soon as possible. Now, the problem you have in this country is at this point, you have the election commission that is unwilling to carry out the election. And then you also have the Constitutional Court that basically paved the way for the nullification of the election results. So what the military should have been doing all along is assisting the government in carrying out the election. Now, all of a sudden, they declare martial law right after the Constitutional Court stripped the Prime Minister of her title. Now, how convenient is that? If you look at the whole situation, it's difficult to look at it and say that they're not all in cahoots. It's really kind of a pathetic situation right now. Looking at the big picture in Thailand, how do we move forward and to get all of these institutions to understand and finally accept the will of the people and what they say at the election ballots? That's the change that we need.
How does that happen, though? That's what I'm trying to understand from you, because you know, I was reading out the different camps that you have in Thailand, and it just seems polarized. So how does the country move forward?
The army needs to take a step back and realize that the only meaningful process that could lead to a government that can govern the country is to have an election. This is how it's done in all the countries on its planet. And the only way to do that is for the army to actually force the election commissioners to stand up and do their job, which the election commissioners have not willingly done the way they're supposed to be doing it.
Is that likely to happen?
By doing that, they're going to send a clear signal that it's not likely to happen, because that doesn't seem to be their stance. Their stance is to have martial law until they can appoint some sort of an interim government and ban all of these media outlets so that these media outlets do not have the opportunity to criticize that move. And then eventually, you know, several months after that, they'll probably revoke martial law. That's my prediction.
Dominic, is that your prediction? I see you nodding along with some of the comments that Nattakorn has made. And also, do you see elections as the only way out of the stalemate? And how likely is it that they actually happen in the near future?
Well, in the near future is a very big question. I mean, we've heard 6 months mentioned already. Usually these interim processes take about 1 year, and that's the typical history. But there are things that are very opaque here that are not being discussed. You know, what needs to be reformed? You have a constitution. What is the problem? We have an elected government. This is a caretaker government. The people looking in from the outside really wonder what's going on inside Thailand. And it's very difficult to explain the level of hatred that seems to exist between these political parties, the contempt that people on one side have for the other.
Kasit, so would you say that there are deep, fundamentally rooted problems in Thailand that are just simply not being addressed year after year, and that's why we see these 18, in fact, military coups that have taken place since 1932? This one is not yet a coup, it's only martial law, but there have been so many coups. Why does that keep on happening in Thailand?
I think we for the past 80 years, we have been undergoing a democratization process, and we have not reached the level of democratic maturity as yet. We were, I think, challenged by communism, by militarism, by authoritarian civilian or military regimes, and so on. But I think the Thai society as a whole becoming more participatory. People are more politically conscious. The feeling of ownership and citizenship has been increasing. So I think we are about to reach sort of a level of a mature democracy, but we still have to reform certain things like electoral process, law on political parties, and I think the commitment to the decentralization process, empowerment of the communities and civil society, and so on. Because in spite of a democratic setting, the bureaucratic structure of Thailand is too centralized. And I think we have to have less government, less of the Bangkok overall control of the country, and let the people, the communities, the localities come more into the picture. Because I think this concentration of power in Bangkok led to a sort of majoritarianism inside the parliament, and the people came out and said they don't want the old style politics of concentration of power. And I think we are moving forward to become a more open society. And I think this is what we are at this point in time. And we need to have the reform process, first about political parties, electoral process, in order to move towards a new elections under a new rules to make it more transparent, fair, free, and safe, and not a sort of illiberal democratic means and so on, and a lot of influence of money into buying of votes and abuses of power.
Nattakorn, is that a view that you share, that Thailand has still not matured fully as a democracy?
Well, the military and the Constitutional Court need to stay away from results of election. The Thai electorate, to be honest, is very mature. And they keep going to the polls and they keep electing their politicians, the members of parliaments that they want and the prime ministers that they want. While the Constitutional Court continues to dissolve political parties, remove elected politicians, and at the same time you have the workings of these independent organizations trying to curb the powers of the elected administration. That's the problem we have at hand. It's not that our democracy isn't mature. The people here are very mature. They want to have their votes, but the institutions that are enshrined within this constitution keeps eating away at the very powers that are supposed to be given to the people. You know, I could talk, all day about the Election Commission, the National Anti-Corruption Commission, the Constitutional Court. All of these organizations keep doing their job and keep eating away at our democracy. That's the problem we have. That's why our country is not going to mature democratically.
Let's get Kasit to respond, because I can see that he wants to respond to you.
I think that's a stupid analysis of the political situation. There is the principle of check and balance. The Constitutional Court is doing its job. It has to interpret the Constitution, and it's a check and balance on the executive and the legislative authorities. If they trespass the law, the Constitutional Court has the duty to say so. So it's a question of check and balance. It's not the question of other legal institutions trying to erode the power of the executive. The executive power is not unlimited. It has to be checked, and then they have to behave under the law. So don't confuse the separation of power and the check of power with the loss of democracy. I think that is a wrong analysis.
Nattakorn?
You gotta let me respond. That's a totally asinine comment by the former foreign minister, and it's kind of sad to see a former foreign minister use the word stupid. It's quite impolite. But anyway, let me make a true, complete analysis opposite of what he just made. The Constitutional Court was essentially set in place to do good things, to interpret the Constitution when there are conflicts between legal bodies in the Constitution. But it was not set in place to remove democratically elected prime minister. That's not checks and balances. That's a power grab. That is essentially a judicial coup d'etat. Former Prime Minister Kasit needs to learn that.
Dominic, I'd like to bring you in to weigh in on this debate.
Well, I mean, Thailand, we always talk about the coups, you know, that Thailand has had 21 coup attempts since 1932. 12 successful, 9 failures. But what's really more interesting is that it's had 18 constitutions. So there's a big problem here with constitutions. You know, they come, they go. We sit here saying, oh, we must reform this, we must change that. We had a constitution that was drawn up in 1997 that was supposed to be a dream constitution. That was knocked out. That lasted longer than any of the others. It was knocked out in 2006. Things were changed then. So there's this constant tinkering. But the problem is that you don't get to the substance of it, which is that people need to respect these constitutions. And if you have an elected government, then it stays and it is removed by the electorate. And there's this sort of constant problem with people suggesting that people who voted don't know what they did. Well, they do. They voted for people. And then we have other parties saying that these are the wrong people, that there's something wrong with them. And it may very well be the case that they are the wrong people, but that's the point of democracy. You have elections to get rid of them. If you don't allow the electorate to make those decisions and to figure out who is good, who is bad, who works for them, who represents their issues, then the flower is constantly trampled. There is no progress. We had elected governments in the 1990s that were appalling in Thailand. We've had elected governments everywhere. And I would suggest that the people that were elected at that time haven't actually had much of a run since, because people here realised that they weren't particularly good politicians. In Burma, we had 25 years of postponed democracy because you had the generals running around saying, here is the sea of democracy, but you better not swim in it because you might drown. We know better, we're protecting you. And the longer you put these things off, the more difficult they are to actually get to grips with. And at some point, you have to allow people to grow up, make some mistakes, dust themselves off, and then move on. But this constant idea of pulling back and then rejigging the whole system and then seeing if the new system works, well, it doesn't. It doesn't take us forward. In '97, one of the outcomes of that particular constitution was that it got rid of the small parties. And the idea was that you would get rid of the money politics and all these little politicians who kept changing horse in midstream. And then you'd have more discipline because you'd have larger parties. And then we had Thaksin Shinawatra come in, Thairak Thai, and develop that idea beautifully. He had a huge majority. And then a lot of people said, well, maybe that wasn't such a good idea.
Right. Okay, well, on that note, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much for joining us. We had Kasit Piromya, Nattakorn Devakula, and Dominic Faulder. Thanks very much for joining us. And to our viewers, you can add your voice to this discussion. You can find us at facebook.com/AJ Inside Story. You can also send us your comments to @AJ Inside Story. That's on Twitter. I'm Dareen Abughaida. For me and the whole team, thanks for watching. Goodbye for now.